My father threw me out into a blizzard when I was 17 years old. Not because I did anything wrong, but because my brother lied, and my father believed him without question. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He didn't investigate. He didn't even hesitate. He just opened the front door, pointed at the worst snowstorm Minnesota had seen in 50 years, and said 5 words that would change my life forever. Lodros neo vivum sob meu teto. I almost died that night. The temperature was -20 degrees Celsius, with wind chill making it feel like -35. I had no phone, no money, nowhere to go, and a father who had just decided I was worth less than his golden child's lies. But I survived. And 13 years later, when that same father showed up at my door, broken and desperate, begging for help because his precious son had destroyed everything, well, let's just say karma has impeccable timing. My name is Nora, and this is the story of how betrayal taught me everything I needed to know about family, loyalty, and the sweetest form of justice. You think you know how this ends, but trust me, you have no idea. It started on December 15th, 2011. I remember the date because it was exactly 3 years after my mother died, and I'd spent the morning at her grave, talking to her like I always did when life got hard. I was 17, a senior in high school, invisible in my own family. My older brother Derek was 22, the golden child who could do no wrong. Successful, charming, my father's pride and joy. Then there was me, the daughter who was never quite good enough, never quite smart enough, never quite worthy of the attention Derek received so effortlessly. My father, Richard, had never been warm, but after my mother died, he became ice. Cold, distant, and completely devoted to Derek. I was just the obligation he had to tolerate until I turned 18. I came home from school that afternoon to find them both waiting for me in the living room. My father sat in his leather chair, the one no one else was allowed to use, his face carved from stone. Derek stood beside him, and I'll never forget the look on his face. He was crying, but there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating that didn't match the tears streaming down his cheeks. "Sit down, Nora," my father said, his voice flat and emotionless. I sat on the couch, my backpack still on my shoulders, confusion mixing with the familiar dread that always came with family confrontations. "Do you have something you want to tell me?" my father asked. I looked between them, genuinely confused. "About what?" Derek made a sound like a wounded animal, and fresh tears spilled down his face. He was good, I'll give him that. If I hadn't known him my whole life, I might have believed the performance. "The money, Nora," my father said, and his voice dropped to that dangerous quiet that meant he was furious. "The $5,000 that your grandmother gave Derek for his graduate school applications. The money that was in an envelope in his room. The money that's now missing." My stomach dropped. I don't know anything about any money. I didn't take anything from Derek's room. I barely even go upstairs anymore. I lived in the basement, as far from my father and brother as I could get in our house. "She's lying," Derek said, his voice breaking convincingly. "I saw her, Dad. Yesterday afternoon when you were at work. I came home early and saw her coming out of my room. She looked guilty, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but now the money's gone, and she was the only one in my room." "I wasn't in your room," I said, my voice rising with panic. "I was at school yesterday afternoon. I had debate practice until 5, and then I went to the library. I didn't even get home until 7. "The debate practice that you quit 3 weeks ago," my father said, and my blood ran cold. How did he know that? I'd quit because the debate coach had made it clear I'd never be captain. That position was reserved for students with better family support, which was code for students whose parents actually showed up to competitions. I'd been too embarrassed to tell my father, not that he would have cared. "I was still at school," I insisted, but I could hear how weak it sounded. "I was in the library, studying. You can check with the librarian, Mrs. Chen. She was there. She saw me." "Mrs. Chen, who retired last month," Derek said quietly, and I felt the trap closing around me. The library that's been unstaffed after 3 p.m. since she left? That library. He'd planned this. Every detail, every alibi I might have had, he'd systematically destroyed. But why? What had I ever done to him? I didn't take your money, I said, and I hated how my voice shook, how desperate I sounded. Derek, why are you doing this? Why are you lying? I'm not lying, he said, and he looked at our father with those wounded eyes. Dad, I know she's my sister, but I can't let this go. That money was from Grandma. It was for my future. And she just took it like it meant nothing. My father stood up, and I'd never seen him look at me with such disgust. I raised you better than this, Nora. Your mother would be ashamed. That hurt more than anything else he could have said. My mother, who had been the only person in this family who loved me unconditionally, who believed in me, who made me feel like I mattered. Using her memory as a weapon was the cruelest thing he could have done. Mom would have believed me, I said, and tears were streaming down my face now. She would have listened to my side. She would have investigated before condemning me. She would have been a real parent. I saw the flash of anger in his eyes, and I knew I'd crossed a line. But I didn't care anymore. If he was going to accuse me of something I didn't do, I was going to tell him exactly what kind of father he'd been since Mom died. Get out, he said quietly. What? I said get out. I will not have a thief living under my roof. I will not have someone who steals from family, who lies to my face, who disrespects her mother's memory. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag and leave. I stared at him in disbelief. Dad, it's -20 degrees outside. There's a blizzard warning. The news said it's the worst storm in 50 years. You can't seriously be throwing me out in this weather. You should have thought about that before you stole from your brother, he said, and his voice was completely devoid of emotion. 9 minutes now. I looked at Derek, silently begging him to tell the truth, to stop this insanity. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw it clearly. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't about money. This was about something else, something darker. And he was going to let our father throw me out into a potentially deadly storm without saying a word. Derek, please, I whispered. Just tell him the truth. Whatever I did to make you hate me this much, I'm sorry. But please don't let him do this. He looked away, and that's when I knew I was truly alone. I ran to my basement room and threw clothes into my backpack with shaking hands. I grabbed my laptop, my charger, the emergency cash I kept hidden in my desk drawer, $300 I'd saved from my part-time job at the grocery store. I put on every layer I owned, 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, 2 sweaters, my winter coat that was already too small because we couldn't afford a new one. I wrapped a scarf around my face and put on my gloves and hat. When I came back upstairs, my father was holding the front door open. Snow was already piling up on the porch, and the wind was howling like something alive and angry. Dad, please, I tried one more time. I'm 17. I'm still in high school. I have nowhere to go. Please don't do this. You made your choice when you stole from this family, he said. Now live with the consequences. He grabbed my phone from the table by the door. You won't be needing this. I pay for that phone, and I'm not paying for a thief's communication. How am I supposed to call for help? I asked, panic rising in my chest. How am I supposed to be safe? You should have thought about that before, he said, and he physically pushed me out the door. I stumbled onto the porch, and the cold hit me like a physical blow. It was so much worse than I'd imagined. The wind cut through my layers like they were paper, and I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me through the driving snow. Dad! I screamed, but he'd already closed the door. I heard the lock click, final and absolute. I stood there for a moment, unable to process what had just happened. My father had just thrown me out into a blizzard. My brother had lied and watched it happen. My family had just tried to kill me. Because that's what this was. In this weather, without shelter, without a phone, without any way to call for help, I could die. I probably would die. And they knew it. I started walking. I didn't have a choice. Standing still meant freezing to death on my own porch, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. The neighborhood was completely deserted. Everyone with any sense was inside, safe and warm, riding out the storm. I walked to the nearest house and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I tried 3 more houses with the same result. Either people weren't home, or they weren't opening their doors to a stranger in the middle of a blizzard. I couldn't blame them, but it didn't make my situation any less desperate. My fingers were already going numb despite my gloves. My face hurt from the cold, even with the scarf wrapped around it. I'd been outside for maybe 20 minutes, and I was already in trouble. I needed to find shelter, and I needed to find it fast. I thought about going to my friend Jessica's house, but she lived on the other side of town, at least an hour's walk in good weather. In this storm, I'd never make it. I thought about going to the school, but it would be locked, and I had no way to get inside. I thought about the grocery store where I worked, but it had closed early because of the storm. Every option I considered led to the same conclusion. I was alone, and I was running out of time. I kept walking, my body on autopilot, my mind starting to go fuzzy from the cold. I'd learned about hypothermia in health class. I knew the signs: confusion, slurred speech, loss of coordination, drowsiness. I was already feeling some of them. My thoughts were getting harder to hold on to, slipping away like the snow blowing past my face. I found myself thinking about my mother. She died when I was 14, cancer that came fast and took her faster. In her last days, when she was so weak she could barely speak, she'd made me promise something. "Nora," she'd whispered, her hand cold in mine. "Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel worthless. Promise me you'll know your value, even when others don't see it. Promise me you'll survive, no matter what." I'd promised, not understanding then what she was really asking. But now, stumbling through a blizzard because my family had thrown me away, I understood. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known that without her there to protect me, my father and brother would destroy me. And she'd tried to give me the armor I'd need to survive. I wasn't going to break that promise. I wasn't going to die in this storm. I was going to survive, and I was going to make them regret every second of this night. That determination kept me moving when my body wanted to stop. It kept me alert when my mind wanted to shut down. It kept me alive when everything else was trying to kill me. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost meaning in the whiteout conditions. But eventually, I saw it. An old garage, detached from a house that looked abandoned. The garage door was partially open, broken and hanging at an angle. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. I squeezed through the gap and collapsed inside, out of the wind for the first time in what felt like hours. The garage was dark, empty except for some old boxes and a broken lawnmower. It smelled like motor oil and decay, but it was out of the wind, and that was all that mattered. I found a corner and curled up as tight as I could, trying to preserve body heat. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, and I couldn't feel my feet anymore. This was bad. This was really bad. But I was alive. For now, I was alive. I spent that night drifting in and out of consciousness, my body fighting to stay warm, my mind replaying the scene in my living room over and over. Derek's fake tears. My father's cold dismissal. The door closing in my face. The lock clicking shut. Why had Derek done this? We'd never been close, but I'd never thought he hated me enough to try to kill me. Because that's what this was, whether he wanted to admit it or not. He'd lied, knowing our father would throw me out, knowing there was a deadly blizzard, knowing I had nowhere to go. He'd tried to kill me, and he'd used our father as the weapon. But why? What had I done to deserve this? I ran through every interaction we'd had in the past few months, looking for the moment I'd crossed some invisible line. But there was nothing. We barely spoke. We lived in the same house but existed in different worlds. Unless that was the problem. Maybe my mere existence was the offense. Maybe being the daughter our father didn't want, The child who reminded him of the wife he'd lost, the obligation he had to fulfill. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe Derek had needed money for something he couldn't tell our father about. Maybe he'd taken the money himself and needed someone to blame. Maybe I was just convenient. The easiest target. The one no one would defend. As the night dragged on and the cold seeped deeper into my bones, I made a decision. If I survived this night, I would find out the truth. I would discover why Derek had done this. And I would make sure everyone knew what kind of people my father and brother really were. Not through violence or revenge, but through success. I would become so successful, so undeniably accomplished, that they would have to face what they'd thrown away. I would document everything, keep records, build a case. And when the time was right, I would show the world exactly who they were. I survived that night, though I'm still not entirely sure how. When dawn finally came, grey and cold but blessedly visible, I forced my frozen body to move. I had to get somewhere warm, somewhere safe, before hypothermia finished what the night had started. I stumbled out of the garage and back into the snow. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. Everything looked different, transformed, like I'd woken up in a different reality. Maybe I had. Maybe the Nora who went into that garage wasn't the same Nora who came out. I walked until I found a gas station that was open. The clerk took one look at me and immediately called an ambulance. I tried to protest, knowing I couldn't afford it, but he insisted. "You've got frostbite, kid," he said, his voice kind but firm. "You need a hospital." At the hospital, they treated my frostbite, gave me warm fluids, and asked questions I didn't want to answer. Where were my parents? Why had I been outside in the blizzard? Was I safe at home? I lied. I told them I'd gotten lost walking home from a friend's house, that my phone had died, that it was just a stupid mistake. I gave them my father's number and watched as they called him, as he played the concerned parent, as he promised to come get me right away. When he arrived, he played his part perfectly. Worried father, relieved his daughter was safe, grateful to the hospital staff. They bought it completely. Why wouldn't they? He was a respected member of the community, a successful businessman, a widower raising 2 children alone. Who would suspect he'd thrown his daughter out to die? In the car on the way home, he didn't say a word. The silence was suffocating, heavy with everything unsaid. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke. "You will not tell anyone what really happened. You will say exactly what you told the hospital. You got lost in the storm. It was an accident. Do you understand?" I looked at him, this man who was supposed to protect me, who was supposed to love me, and I felt something inside me die. The last remnant of the daughter who wanted her father's approval, who hoped he might someday see her value, who believed family meant something. She died in that moment, frozen and buried like the world outside. "I understand," I said quietly. "Good. And Nora, if you ever steal from this family again, I won't be so lenient. Next time, you won't get a second chance." He actually believed it. He actually believed I'd stolen the money, that I deserved what happened, that he was being generous by letting me come back. Or maybe he didn't believe it. Maybe he knew Derek had lied, and he just didn't care. Maybe choosing his golden child over his daughter was easier than facing the truth. Either way, the message was clear. I was not wanted. I was not valued. I was not safe in my own home. I went back to my basement room and started planning. I had 6 months until I turned 18 and graduated high school. 6 months to save every penny I could, to prepare for the moment I could leave and never come back. 6 months to document everything, to build my case, to prepare for the long game. I bought a small notebook and started writing everything down. Dates, times, conversations, incidents. Every time my father ignored me, every time Derek smirked at me across the dinner table, every piece of evidence that showed what my family really was. I also started digging into Derek's life. If he'd lied about the money, there had to be a reason. People don't destroy their siblings without motivation. I needed to know what that motivation was. It took me 3 weeks, but I found it. Derek had a gambling problem. A serious one. He'd been betting on sports, playing online poker, making increasingly desperate bets to cover his losses. The $5,000 from our grandmother? He'd lost it in a single night, betting on a basketball game. He'd needed someone to blame, and I was the perfect scapegoat. I documented everything. Screenshots of his online gambling accounts that I accessed using passwords I'd watched him type. Bank statements I found in his room when he was out. Text messages with his bookie that I photographed with a disposable camera I bought with cash. I built a file that proved beyond any doubt that Derek was a liar and a gambling addict, and that I'd been telling the truth all along. But I didn't show it to my father. Not yet. Because I knew it wouldn't matter. He'd chosen Derek over me long before the money disappeared. Showing him proof would just make him defensive, would make him double down on his choice. No, I needed to wait. I needed to become successful first, to become undeniable, to become someone he couldn't dismiss or ignore. Then, when I had power and he had none, I would show him exactly what he'd done. The next 6 months were the longest of my life. I worked every shift I could at the grocery store, saved every penny, and avoided my family as much as possible. I ate dinner in my room, left for school early, came home late. I became a ghost in my own house, invisible and silent. My father seemed relieved. Derek ignored me completely, his lie apparently forgotten, his conscience apparently clear. Neither of them noticed I was planning my escape. Neither of them cared enough to ask if I was okay, if I'd recovered from my night in the blizzard, if I needed anything. I was already gone to them. I just hadn't left yet. On my 18th birthday, I didn't celebrate. I woke up, went to school, came home, and waited. At midnight, the moment I was legally an adult, I packed my bags, took the $3,000 I'd saved, and walked out the front door. I left a note on the kitchen table. I'm 18 now. I'm leaving. Don't look for me. Don't contact me. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a family anymore. I never looked back. I moved to Chicago, as far from Minnesota as I could afford to go while still staying in the Midwest. I worked 3 jobs while putting myself through community college, then transferred to a 4-year university on a scholarship. I studied finance and engineering, driven by the same determination that had kept me alive in that garage. I graduated top of my class, got recruited by a major financial firm, and started climbing the corporate ladder with single-minded focus. By the time I was 25, I was a senior analyst. By 28, I was a department head. By 30, I was one of the youngest vice presidents in the company's history, managing a team of 50 people and overseeing billions in assets. I bought a beautiful condo in downtown Chicago with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake. I drove a Tesla. I wore designer suits. I built a life that was everything my father said I'd never achieve. But success didn't heal the wound. It didn't fill the hole where a family should have been. Late at night, when the work was done and the apartment was quiet, I still thought about that night in the blizzard. I still felt the cold seeping into my bones. I still heard the lock clicking shut. And I still wanted them to know. I wanted them to see what they'd thrown away. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of their mistake. I got my chance on a Tuesday in March, 13 years after that terrible night. I was working late in my home office when my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and felt my heart stop. My father stood on my doorstep, and he looked terrible. Older, grayer, thinner, like he'd aged 20 years in 13. His clothes were worn, his shoulders slumped, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could watch him stand there, could let him ring the bell until he gave up and left, could deny him the same way he denied me. But I needed to know. After 13 years of silence, why was he here? What could possibly have brought him to my door? I opened it, and we stared at each other for a long moment. I saw him taking in my expensive clothes, the marble foyer behind me, the obvious signs of success and wealth. I saw the shock in his eyes, the confusion, the dawning realization that I wasn't the failure he'd expected. "Nora," he said finally, his voice rough and uncertain. "I found you. I've been looking for months. You're hard to track down when you don't want to be found." "That was intentional," I said coldly. "What do you want, Richard?" The use of his first name made him flinch, just like I'd intended. "I need your help," he said, and his voice broke. I don't know where else to turn. You're my daughter. Your family. Please, I need your help." I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in, making it clear this conversation would happen on my terms. "I'm your daughter? That's interesting. Because 13 years ago, you threw your daughter out into a blizzard and told her she wasn't family anymore. So which is it, Richard? Am I your daughter when you need something, but not when I needed you?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I know I made mistakes. I know I wasn't the father I should have been. But please, Nora, I'm desperate. It's Derek. He's destroyed everything." And there it was. The real reason for his visit. Not remorse, not a desire to reconcile, not even curiosity about how I'd survived and thrived. He needed something, and I was his last resort. "Tell me," I said, and I kept my voice neutral, professional, like he was a client pitching a business proposal. "Tell me what Derek did." My father's story came out in broken pieces, and with each word, I felt a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Derek's gambling problem, the one I'd discovered 13 years ago, had never stopped. It had only gotten worse. He'd gambled away his graduate school money, then his savings, then money he'd borrowed from friends. When that wasn't enough, he'd started stealing from my father. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. He'd forged checks, used my father's credit cards, taken out loans in my father's name. By the time my father discovered what was happening, Derek had destroyed his credit, emptied his retirement accounts, and put a second mortgage on the house. I confronted him, my father said, his voice shaking. I told him he needed help, that we'd figure it out together. But he just left. Disappeared. I haven't heard from him in 6 months. And now I'm losing everything. The house is in foreclosure. I had to declare bankruptcy. I lost my business. I have nothing left, Nora. Nothing. He looked up at me with desperate eyes, and I saw what he wanted before he even asked. I know I have no right to ask this. I know I failed you. But you're successful now. You have money. You could help me save the house, help me get back on my feet. You're my daughter. You're all I have left. The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything he'd done, after throwing me out to die, after choosing Derek over me again and again, after 13 years of silence, he thought he could show up and ask for money. He thought being related by blood gave him the right to my success, to the life I'd built from the ashes of the family he'd destroyed. Let me make sure I understand, I said, and my voice was dangerously quiet. Derek, the son you chose over me, the son you believed without question, the son you protected while throwing me away, has destroyed your life. And now you want me, the daughter you called a thief and a liar, the daughter you threw out into a blizzard, the daughter you haven't spoken to in 13 years, to save you. Is that correct? He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know I don't deserve it. I know I was a terrible father. But please, Nora, I'm begging you. I have nowhere else to go. I stepped back and gestured for him to come inside. Hope flared in his eyes, pathetic and desperate. He thought I was going to help him. He thought blood and desperation would be enough to erase 13 years of abandonment. He was wrong. I led him to my living room, with its expensive furniture and original artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. I watched him take it all in, saw him calculating how much money I must have, how much I could give him. Sit, I said, and he sat on my white leather couch like a supplicant before a throne. I remained standing, looking down at him, enjoying the reversal of power. Before we discuss anything else, I want to tell you a story. It's about a 17-year-old girl who was thrown out into a blizzard by her father. Do you remember that night, Richard? He nodded, unable to speak. That girl almost died. She spent the night in an abandoned garage, shaking so hard she thought her bones would break, convinced she wouldn't see morning. She got frostbite. She could have lost fingers or toes. She could have died of hypothermia. All because her father believed a lie without investigation, without question, without even considering that his golden child might not be telling the truth. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. The folder I'd been keeping for 13 years, updated and maintained, waiting for this moment. But that girl survived. And do you know what she did? She investigated. She found the truth. She documented everything. I opened the folder and spread the contents on the coffee table in front of him. Bank statements, screenshots, photographs, a complete record of Derek's gambling addiction and the theft of the $5,000. Derek lied, I said simply. He gambled away the money our grandmother gave him, and he blamed me to cover his tracks. And you believed him. You threw me out to die rather than question your precious son. My father stared at the evidence, his face going white. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, Nora, I didn't know. I should have investigated. I should have believed you. I'm so sorry. You're sorry, I repeated, and I laughed, cold and bitter. You're sorry now, 13 years later, when you need something from me. But where was this remorse when I was in the hospital with frostbite? Where was this apology when I turned 18 and left? Where was this regret for the past 13 years? He was crying openly now, his whole body shaking with sobs. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I failed you as a father. I chose Derek over you, and I was wrong. Please, Nora, please forgive me. I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just please, help me. I sat down across from him, calm and composed, and looked at the broken man who used to be my father. You want my help? You want me to save you from the consequences of your choices, just like you saved Derek from the consequences of his? You want me to be the family you never were to me? He nodded desperately. Yes. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but please. I leaned forward, and I let him see the cold calculation in my eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Richard. I'm going to help you. But not in the way you think. I pulled out another folder, this one containing financial documents I'd prepared months ago, when I'd first learned about Derek's destruction of my father's finances. Because I'd been tracking them both for years, watching from a distance, waiting for this moment. I'm going to buy your house, I said. I'll pay off the mortgage, clear the foreclosure, and take ownership. You can stay there, rent-free, for the rest of your life. I'll also set up a trust fund that will provide you with a modest monthly income, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. You'll never have to worry about money again. Hope blazed in his eyes, so bright it was almost painful to see. Thank you, he gasped. Thank you, Nora. I knew you were better than me. Thank you. I'm not finished, I said, and my voice cut through his gratitude like a knife. In exchange, you're going to do something for me. You're going to tell the truth. I pulled out a video camera and set it up on the coffee table, pointing at him. You're going to record a statement explaining everything. How Derek lied about the money. How you threw me out without investigation. How you chose him over me again and again. How he destroyed your life while I built mine. You're going to admit, on camera, that you were wrong about everything. And I'm going to keep that video. And if you ever try to claim that you were a good father, if you ever try to rewrite history or play the victim, I will release it to everyone we know. Do you understand? He stared at the camera like it was a weapon pointed at his head. Which, in a way, it was. You want me to confess? To admit everything on camera? That's the price of my help, I said simply. The truth. Full, complete, unvarnished truth. You tell the world what kind of father you were, or you get nothing from me. You can go back to your foreclosed house and your bankruptcy and figure it out on your own, just like you made me figure it out on my own when I was 17. I could see him struggling, his pride warring with his desperation. But desperation won, like I knew it would. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it. I'll tell the truth. I turned on the camera and watched as my father, broken and defeated, confessed everything. He talked about Derek's lie, about throwing me out in the blizzard, about choosing his son over his daughter repeatedly. He talked about how wrong he'd been, how he'd failed as a father, how I'd survived and succeeded despite him, not because of him. He cried through most of it, his voice breaking, his hands shaking. It was pathetic and painful and exactly what I needed. When he finished, I turned off the camera and saved the file to multiple locations. Insurance, in case he ever tried to backtrack. There's one more condition, I said. You will have no contact with me beyond what's necessary for the financial arrangements. No phone calls, no visits, no attempts at reconciliation. You wanted me out of your life 13 years ago, and now you're out of mine. The only relationship we have is financial. I'm your landlord and your benefactor, nothing more. Do you understand? He looked like I'd slapped him. But I thought if I told the truth, if I admitted everything, maybe you could forgive me. Maybe we could have a relationship again. Forgive you, I said, and I let him hear the ice in my voice. Richard, I don't forgive you. I will never forgive you. What you did was unforgivable. You threw your daughter out to die because it was easier than questioning your son. You chose comfort over truth, favoritism over justice, and you nearly killed me in the process. That's not something you apologize away. That's not something that gets fixed with a confession and some tears. I stood up, towering over him, and I felt the power of this moment, the culmination of 13 years of planning and preparation. I'm helping you because I'm a better person than you are. Because I won't let you become homeless and destitute, even though you deserve it. Because my mother raised me to be better than the people who hurt me. But don't mistake mercy for forgiveness. Don't mistake financial support for love. You are nothing to me but an obligation I'm choosing to fulfill. That's all you'll ever be. He sat there, broken and crying, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness. Just a cold, empty space where a father's love should have been. My lawyer will contact you with the paperwork, I said. Sign everything, follow the rules, and you'll be taken care of. Break the rules, and you're on your own. Now get out of my house. He stood on shaking legs and walked to the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you became. Your mother would be proud too. Don't you dare, I said, and my voice was sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare talk about my mother. She would be ashamed of you. She would be horrified by what you did to me. The only thing she'd be proud of is that I survived despite you. Now leave. He left, and I closed the door behind him with a sense of finality. It was done. 13 years of planning, of building, of preparing for this moment, and it was done. I'd won. I'd proven that I was stronger, smarter, more successful than the family that threw me away. I'd made them face the consequences of their choices. I'd gotten my revenge. So why did I feel so empty? I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. I'd built an incredible life. I had a career I loved, financial security, respect from my peers, everything I dreamed of during those desperate early years. But I was alone. I'd been so focused on proving my worth to people who would never see it, so determined to make them regret abandoning me, that I'd forgotten to build the things that actually mattered. Friendships. Relationships. A real family, chosen instead of biological. I'd won the war, but I'd lost something important in the process. My phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was my assistant, calling about a meeting tomorrow. As I answered, professional and composed, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked successful, powerful, in control. But I also looked lonely. The truth was, my father's visit hadn't given me the satisfaction I'd expected. Seeing him broken and desperate, watching him beg for help, making him confess on camera, none of it had healed the wound from that night in the blizzard. Revenge, I realized, doesn't actually fix anything. It doesn't undo the past or heal the damage. It just creates a different kind of emptiness. Over the next few weeks, I followed through on my promises. I bought my father's house, set up his trust fund, and arranged for him to stay there rent-free. My lawyer handled everything, keeping me at a distance from the actual transactions. I didn't want to see him again, didn't want to risk any emotional complications. But I also started making other changes in my life. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with during my single-minded pursuit of success. I started going to therapy to process the trauma I'd been carrying for 13 years. I joined a support group for people who'd experienced family estrangement. I started building the life I actually wanted, not just the life that would prove something to people who didn't matter. And slowly, gradually, I started to heal. Not because of revenge, but because I finally let myself grieve for the family I'd never had, the father who'd failed me, the childhood that had been stolen. I grieved, and then I started to build something new. 6 months after my father's visit, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. Nora. The voice was familiar but changed, rougher and uncertain. It's Derek. I should have hung up. I should have blocked the number and moved on. But curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? I heard about what you did for Dad, he said. I heard you bought the house, set him up with income. That was really generous of you, considering everything. Considering you lied and nearly got me killed, you mean? I said coldly. Considering you destroyed his life just like you tried to destroy mine? There was a long silence. I know, he said finally. I know what I did. I've known for 13 years, and it's eaten me alive. I'm calling to tell you the truth, even though it's way too late. Even though it won't fix anything. I already know the truth, I said. I've known since 3 weeks after you lied. I found your gambling accounts, your debts, everything. I documented it all. So if you're calling to confess, save your breath. I don't need your confession. You knew. He sounded shocked. You knew the whole time? Of course I knew. Did you really think I'd just accept being called a thief and thrown out without investigating? I'm not the stupid little sister you always thought I was, Derek. I never was. Another long silence. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke. I'm so sorry, Nora. I was desperate and scared, and I made the worst decision of my life. I blamed you because it was easy, because Dad always believed me over you, because I thought I could get away with it. I never thought he'd actually throw you out. I never thought you'd almost die. I never thought. You never thought about me at all, I finished. You never considered what your lie would do to me. You just saw an easy solution to your problem, and you took it. That's who you are, Derek. That's who you've always been. Someone who takes the easy way out, no matter who gets hurt. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right. I'm a coward and a liar, and I destroyed everything good in my life. I destroyed Dad's life. I destroyed our family. And I destroyed any chance of ever having a relationship with my sister. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know there's nothing I can say or do to make this right. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did. I know what I am. And I'm sorry. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him exactly what his lie had cost me, to make him feel a fraction of the pain I'd endured. But another part of me, the part that had been working on healing, just felt tired. Your apology doesn't change anything, I said. It doesn't undo the past or fix the damage. But I appreciate you finally admitting the truth. For what it's worth, I hope you get help for your gambling addiction. I hope you figure out how to be a better person. But I hope you do it far away from me, because I don't want you in my life. I don't want either of you in my life. I'm done with the family that tried to destroy me. I understand, he said. I wanted you to know that I see you now. I see how strong you are, how successful you've become, how you survived everything we put you through. And I'm in awe of you, Nora. I'm in awe of the woman you became despite us. Goodbye, Derek, I said, and I hung up before he could respond. I blocked his number and sat in silence, processing the conversation. His apology hadn't changed anything, just like I'd said. But somehow, hearing him finally admit the truth, hearing him acknowledge what he'd done, had lifted a weight I didn't know I was carrying. I didn't forgive him. I probably never would. But I also didn't need to carry the anger anymore. I could let it go, not for his sake, but for mine. A year after my father's visit, I was invited to speak at a conference for women in finance. The topic was overcoming adversity and building success from nothing. As I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, I made a decision. I told my story. Not all of it, not the identifying details, but the core truth. I talked about being thrown away by my family, about surviving when I should have died, about building a life from nothing. I talked about the temptation of revenge and the emptiness it brings. I talked about the importance of healing, of building chosen family, of defining success on your own terms rather than as a response to those who hurt you. The response was overwhelming. After my speech, dozens of women came up to share their own stories of family estrangement, of surviving abuse, of building lives from ashes. I realized I wasn't alone in my experience. There were thousands, maybe millions, of people who'd been thrown away by their families and had to figure out how to survive. And many of them, like me, had turned that pain into power. I started a foundation that year, focused on helping young people who'd been kicked out by their families. We provided emergency housing, job training, college scholarships, and mental health support. We helped kids who were going through what I'd gone through, who were sleeping in garages and wondering if they'd survive the night. It became my life's work, more important than my corporate job, more fulfilling than any amount of money or success. Helping others heal helped me heal. Giving them the support I'd never had gave meaning to my suffering. My pain had a purpose now, beyond just proving something to people who didn't matter. 2 years after my father's visit, I met someone. Her name was Claire, and she was a therapist who volunteered with my foundation. The past few years had aged him, stress and regret etched into every line of his face. "Nora," he said when he saw me, and tears immediately filled his eyes. "You came. I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't," I said honestly. I sat in the chair next to his bed, keeping a careful distance. "The doctors say you're going to be okay." This was a warning, not the end. "I know," he said. But it made me think about what happens when it is the end. About what I'd be leaving behind. And I realized I'd be leaving nothing but regrets and apologies you'll never accept. "You're right," I said. "I won't accept them. What you did was unforgivable, and no amount of apologies will change that." He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. "I know. But I need to say it anyway. I need you to know that I think about that night every single day. I see you standing on the porch, begging me not to do it, and I see myself closing the door anyway. It's the worst thing I've ever done, Nora. The worst decision I've ever made. And I'd give anything to go back and change it. But you can't," I said simply. "None of us can change the past. We can only decide what we do with the present." "What are you doing with your present?" he asked. "Are you happy?" I thought about Claire, about my foundation, about the life I'd built. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. "I'm happy. I have a wife I love, work that matters, friends who are real family. I built a good life, despite everything." "Because of me or despite me?" he asked quietly. "Despite you," I said without hesitation. "Everything good in my life, I built in spite of what you did, not because of it. You don't get credit for my success. You don't get to claim that throwing me out made me stronger. It almost killed me, and the fact that I survived doesn't make what you did okay." He closed his eyes, and tears leaked out from under his lids. I know. I needed to hear about your life. I needed to know that you're okay. That's all I wanted. We sat in silence for a while, and I realized this was probably the last real conversation we'd ever have. When he died, whenever that was, this would be the memory I'd carry. And I needed to decide what I wanted that memory to be. I don't forgive you, I said finally. I want to be clear about that. I don't forgive you for what you did, and I never will. But I also don't hate you anymore. I don't spend my time thinking about you or wishing things had been different. I've moved on. I've built a life that doesn't include you, and I'm happy with that life. So I guess what I'm saying is I release you. I release you from the hope that we'll ever have a real relationship. I release you from the guilt, because carrying it doesn't change anything. And I release myself from the need for your approval or your remorse. We're done, Richard. Not in anger, but in acceptance. We're just done. He opened his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in my life. You're extraordinary, he said quietly. You're everything I should have seen when you were growing up. Everything I was too blind to recognize. Your mother would be so proud of you. I know, I said. I carry her with me every day. She's the reason I survived. She's the reason I'm the person I am. Not you. Her. I stood up to leave, and he reached out, his hand trembling. Will I see you again? I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe. Maybe not. But either way, I'll be okay. That's what you need to understand. I don't need you. I never did. I just needed you to be better than you were, and you couldn't do that. But I survived anyway. I thrived anyway. And I'll continue to thrive, with or without you in my life. I walked out of that hospital room and felt something shift inside me. The last chain connecting me to my past, the last thread of anger and hurt and need for validation, finally broke. I was free. Not because he'd apologized or because I'd forgiven him, but because I'd finally, truly let go. I flew back to Chicago, back to Claire and my real life, and I didn't look back. My father recovered from his heart attack and lived for another 5 years. We exchanged occasional emails, brief and polite, updating each other on major life events. When he died, I went to the funeral, stood in the back, and left before anyone could try to talk to me about reconciliation or family healing. Derek was there, looking older and worn down by his own demons. We made eye contact across the cemetery, and I saw everything in that look: regret, shame, a question about whether we could ever be siblings again. I looked away, and that was my answer. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Some relationships, once broken, aren't meant to be repaired. And that's okay. Not every story has a happy ending where families reunite and all is forgiven. Sometimes the happy ending is walking away, building something new, and finding peace in the life you create rather than the life you were given. Today, I'm 35 years old. I run a successful foundation that's helped thousands of young people who were thrown away by their families. I have a wife who loves me, friends who chose me, and a life full of meaning and purpose. I own that house in Minnesota, the one my father lived in until he died. I thought about selling it, but instead, I turned it into a group home for LGBTQ+ youth who've been kicked out by their families. It felt right, transforming the place where I was rejected into a place where others would be accepted. The garage where I almost died that night? I bought the property and turned it into a community center, offering resources and support for homeless youth. Every time I visit, I stand in that spot where I curled up, shaking and scared, and I remember the promise I made: I will survive. I will become stronger. I will make them regret what they did. I kept that promise, but not in the way I expected. The real revenge wasn't making my father and brother suffer. It was building a life so full of love and purpose that their absence didn't matter. It was becoming so completely, authentically happy that their approval became irrelevant. It was transforming my pain into something that helped others, so my suffering had meaning beyond just my own story. That's the lesson I learned from being thrown out in a blizzard. You can't control what people do to you, but you can control what you do with it. You can let it destroy you, or you can let it transform you. You can spend your life seeking revenge, or you can spend it building something beautiful. The choice is yours. I chose beauty. I chose healing. I chose to become the person my mother always believed I could be. And in the end, that was the greatest revenge of all. Living well, loving deeply, and proving that the people who threw me away were wrong about everything. This is Nora, signing off. To anyone out there who's been rejected by their family, who's been thrown away and told they're worthless, you're not. You're valuable, you're worthy of love, and you're capable of building an extraordinary life. Don't let the people who failed you define your worth. Don't waste your energy on revenge. Instead, pour that energy into becoming the person you were always meant to be. Survive. Thrive. Build something beautiful. And when the people who hurt you finally realize what they lost, you'll be too busy living your best life to care. That's the real victory. That's the real justice. That's the real happy ending.